All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. A few more people will probably trickle in, but welcome everybody to tonight's program, How to Help Your Child Overcome Procrastination. For any who joined a little bit after I said it, we would love if you could drop in the chat what grade your student is in. That'll help Ann with her presentation. So welcome tonight. Just a quick little thing about what the UVA Club does. My name is Robin Tiberio, and I am a board member with the UVA Club of Washington, D.C. And we put on virtual and in-person programming for any alumni, student, parent, or friend of UVA in the D.C. area. We're about 50,000 strong, which is great. And we do all kinds of programming from stuff like this that's kind of school and academic related to networking, to game watches for UVA sports, to social. We have a book club. So if you're not super familiar with our programming, please feel free to check us out at dchoops.org. I'll drop that in the chat in a little bit. We'd love to see you at some other events. So jumping into tonight, how to help your child overcome procrastination. Fortunately, procrastination is a habit that your child can unlearn. And Ann Dolin is here tonight to teach us some strategies for implementing at home. So she's going to go ahead and go through the presentation, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. This whole session will also be recorded, and then we will be sending that recording out to all registrants if you'd like to look at the slides or listen to the presentation again. So a little bit about Ann. She's the founder and president of Educational Connections. She knows how relationships between parents and children can become defined by their grades. She's a recognized expert in the field of education, and she loves speaking to families about reducing academic stress and power struggles so parents can enjoy their relationships with their children. What started as an hour of tutoring at Ann's kitchen table has grown to the nationally recognized Educational Connections, a tutoring company employing more than 125 subject tutors, test prep tutors, and executive function coaches. Through virtual one-to-one learning sessions, Ann and her team help kids overcome academic obstacles, prep for college, and improve their confidence and grades. She has more than 25 years of experience, and she's written 3 books for parents, including her most recent, Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. So she's so qualified to talk on this topic. And with that, I will turn it over to Ann.
Excellent, Robin. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me this evening, and welcome everybody. So before we get started, I have a favor to ask you. If you haven't already, if you could jump into the chat and put the grade levels of your student or students, that would be fantastic. So I'm interested in knowing, is your child in elementary, middle, high school, what specific grade, or even college? So thank you so much for doing that. So let's see what we have. All right, a 9th grader, a 10th grader, a 5th and a 3rd grader. Welcome, Sarah. A 12th grader, an 11th grader, a 5th grader, a 7th grader, and a 4th grader. So thank you for all of you who contributed to that. It looks like we have parents of kids really across the gamut, from young learners in 3rd grade. Somebody also said a freshman in college, to a freshman in college. So I want to cover all of those ranges, because here's what I know. If we can help kids with some of the skills in these areas when they're young in elementary school and give them a few tricks up their sleeve, it gets easier for them as they go through college. You know, the issues that we face with our kids over procrastination aren't unique. Every day, parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And it's not uncommon to hear things like, oh, you know, if he's struggling to get started and focus and get everything done on time now, you know, in 9th grade, what's it going to be like when he goes off to college? Parents are worried that their kids have a harder time now more than ever, just doing 2 things, focusing and finishing, and then ultimately getting their work done on time. So the issues we find our kids in are nationwide, and the statistics show that. A study published in Edutopia showed that 86% of high schoolers, and this is a self-report, say that they procrastinate. And it tends to get worse in college, where up to 95% of college students report that they procrastinate. And out of those students, 50% of them consider themselves to be chronic procrastinators. And so, in some ways, procrastination isn't always bad because it kind of, a little bit of anxiety is not always, the bad guy, because it forces kids and adults to kind of get it in gear and to crank something out and to get it done. So it gives us a little bit of adrenaline to get going. The problem is, though, that the longer students wait when it comes to academics, actually the worse their grades are. And chronic procrastination is linked to stress, depression, anxiety, fatigue. And all these things obviously aren't good for kids. Now, when it comes to procrastination, I believe there's actually two kinds of procrastinators. There's functional procrastinators and dysfunctional procrastinators. You may have some of these people in your life. Functional procrastinators are the students that will wait until the last minute to get an assignment done. So let's say that they have an essay due in 2 weeks. It's due on a Friday, and they've had all this time to get it done, but they don't start on it until Thursday night. And they stay up really late. Again, their back is against the wall, the adrenaline's pumping, and somehow they eke it out. And although their grade might not be as good as it would have been if they started earlier, nobody knows about the situation. The teacher doesn't know on her end or his end. None of the other students in the class know. Only the student knows, and probably everybody else in the family is stressed out about it. The other type of procrastinators are dysfunctional, meaning that they also have the same behaviors. They wait until the last minute, but there's something in their way that prevents them to get something done. So typically it's that they wait too late, or that they don't have the skills to eke it out. And then everybody kind of knows, if it's a class where the assignment's discussed, other students know. The teacher knows because obviously the student didn't turn it in on time. And typically everybody in the family is stressed out, including the student. So sometimes when we have kids in our home that are functional procrastinators, they may not have a pain point. And if they've existed like this for a long period of time and they haven't learned from their mistakes so much, it's partially because they've been able to get away with that behavior. Whereas dysfunctional procrastinators often have a greater pain point. So they sometimes may be willing to change their behavior because it's become painful for them. So I'm wondering, in your house, do you have a functional or a dysfunctional procrastinator? If you could put that in the chat, I'm curious to know where your child falls. And hearing those descriptions, do you think your student is a functional procrastinator or a dysfunctional procrastinator? Thank you, John. You said functional. Jen said functional. Phyllis, she said dysfunctional. I see functional again, functional. Angela said a little bit of both. Interesting. So it seems like functional outweighs dysfunctional. 3 other people said a little bit of both. And that's generally what we see in my practice. When parents call looking for an executive function tutor, and I'll explain executive functions in just a moment, or just a subject tutor, one of the things they often report is kids don't get started on time, and it's created a lot of stress in the household. And sometimes parents say they haven't learned from this behavior. And so it's our job to help them figure out another way, especially if they're a little bit reluctant. And I do think that the pandemic has actually made things worse. We see that, whoops, let me go back. And we see that in our practice, and that kids didn't have a lot of structure when they were learning from home. And they didn't obviously have class after class, have a set structure when they had to see their teacher and turn things in. And so they kind of got out of practice. And we saw that the 2 subjects that were impacted the most were writing and math, and then the ability to focus and get work done and turned in on time. And that's more of like an executive function skill. So when we think of all the things that are going on in kids' lives, including just the ability to focus and to sit at a desk and to get their work done in a timely fashion, It may feel like, well, maybe this is a little bit worse from the pandemic, but if you've seen this pattern over a long period of time, and it's not just something that's happened this year or last year, but you've seen it, kind of stretch out over multiple years, it could be related to something else. And it's likely that the cause of it isn't willful behavior. It's not that kids are lazy or they're irresponsible or they just don't care. It's likely rooted in this skill or this cognitive ability we all have in the front of our brain called executive functions. And executive functions are really important as we go through life because they help us to prioritize what we have to do, to think ahead, and to really execute on tasks. But when it comes to students, there's really 8 executive function skills. And let me touch on all of them really quick, and then we're going to focus tonight on one of initiation. So inhibition is a person's ability to bat away distractions like your phone. You get a text message on your phone or your brother's playing on the other side of the room. Can you put that aside and focus on your work? Initiation is just getting started, especially on something that you don't want to do. Planning and organization. If you have maybe 3 things to do, can you prioritize those 3 tasks so you're organized enough and get them done? Emotional control is another executive function. That's basically doing these things and keeping it under emotional control so that you're not reduced to tears or there's not dramatic behavior over getting stuff done. Working memory is also an executive function, and that's not short term, it's not long term, it's your ability to juggle multiple things in your head at the same time. So for the person with an elementary schooler in the chat, if you say, hey, Jimmy, go to your room and get your coat, your mittens, and don't forget to brush your teeth, it's likely that Jimmy's come down with his mittens, but he doesn't have his coat and he hasn't brushed his teeth because he has to juggle those 3 things in his head. It also has to do with juggling ideas and punctuation and grammar when you're writing, remembering the steps in math. Shifting is putting down one thing and starting another. Materials organization. It used to be things like digital or like backpacks, binders, folders, but these days it's digital files. And then lastly, and this is the hardest executive function skill for students, it's the one that comes online the latest, is self-monitoring. And that's your ability to say, you know what, I've put this off for a long time. I really should stop watching YouTube videos and get back to my schoolwork. Your ability to self-correct in a moment is a hard skill for kids, but it's really important. So let's talk about that one I mentioned called initiation, which is basically dealing with procrastination. We know that behavior can be improved, but we first have to understand what's causing the behavior. And if you were with me last month when we talked about executive functions, you may remember that I talked about the reason kids procrastinate in the first place. And as parents, we often think, oh, my kid's really smart. He knows how to do this stuff. He's just lazy, or he just doesn't want to do it. And, frankly, sometimes there's a little bit of truth to that. Sometimes there are kids that just simply don't want to do their work. But my experience has been that that's not the majority of students. It's typically that they feel overwhelmed and underprepared. They're not sure exactly how to tackle the assignment or break it down, or they don't know if they have the exact skills to do it well. And then the last group of kids, and probably the most growing group of students that we see, are perfectionists. And perfectionism is rooted in anxiety. And these students procrastinate because they often worry that the work they do, if it's not going to be perfect, maybe they shouldn't start it. Maybe if they feel a little bit better later, that's a better time to tackle it. Really, they're very anxious inside, and that's causing their avoidance of the task. So regardless of the reasons our kids procrastinate, there are some ways we can help them. So tonight, let's talk about 8 tips to help our kids in your household. First, and number one, is students and adults need to know when they're about to procrastinate. You have to be able to identify, I'm about to put this task off when I really know I should do it. Once you can identify the behavior, then you can take action. But if you don't realize you're doing it, it's really hard to fix something. In fact, there's a really great book called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle, and it's by Timothy Peichel. I highly recommend it if this is what's happening in your house. And he says it's actually not a time management problem, it's an emotion management problem. Because if you think about it, if you're constantly putting something off that you want to do, that's your emotions taking over. And it's not allowing you to get what you need to do done. So you kind of have to know, oh my gosh, this is what my emotions are doing to me right now. I need to find another way to get started. So knowing that you're about to procrastinate gives you a leg up. Another strategy is time travel. And that means the ability to use self-talk. Self-talk is an amazing strategy for kids and for college students and for adults too. And so self-talk is basically talking to yourself. That's all it is. And you want to use if-then scenarios. If I finish this math, then I can go to dinner with my friends and not have it hanging over my shoulders. If I finish this lab from biology, then I can play Xbox. So trying to look into the future, if I get this done now, then I can have this reward, is really powerful. Because basically you want to tell your brain that getting started and doing something isn't that bad. I'll talk in a second about how to trick your brain into making it think it's easy, but you also want to convince your brain that there's something else coming up after the thing that you don't want to do. And so that leads us to tip 3, which is make getting started easy. So you want your brain to think, oh, this is not going to be that hard. I'm going to make it easy. Because if your brain thinks it's not that difficult, it's willing to do this task, even if it feels overwhelming. And there's 2 ways you can trick your brain. One is by time. I love timers, by the way. I've used them for kids in kindergarten and a lot in college too. This is my favorite one. I like this one a lot for young kids. I'd say elementary and middle school kids, because the red floating disc shows elapsed time. But I say to kids, look, get a timer. Ideally, it's not on your phone because that's inherently distracting. But it can be, any physical timer that you can find. But you want to set it for a time that's super short that your brain is willing to do. And I call the easiest one 5 minutes of fury. The idea is anybody can do anything furiously for 5 minutes, or tolerable 10. Anybody can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. Or you can use the strategy of take your age and add 1 to it. And you say to yourself, I'm going to work as hard as I can, as best I can, focus as much as I can, just for 10 minutes, and then I can take a quick break. And often kids will be able to keep on going. They don't even need the break. You can also divide it by task. And that means you look at what you have to do, and maybe you have a page of math, and you say, you know what? I don't want to do this. So I'm just going to do the easy ones that I know how to do first. Or I really don't want to write this DBQ for my AP Lit class. You know what? I'm just going to start out by writing the first few sentences. I need to gather 5 sources. That feels overwhelming. You know what? I'm just going to gather 2, and that's all I'm going to do. And then I'm going to take a break. So those are strategies to help kids that, they generally know what to do, but they can't get themselves to do it. They don't have that internal oomph. So let's talk about the other 2 reasons we discussed. One is overwhelmed and underprepared, and the other is perfectionist. So if your child is overwhelmed and underprepared, sometimes you don't know this, they won't tell you this, but it's a thing. We see this more often than not. I would recommend, if your student is in middle or high school and they have block scheduling, to start on the day it's assigned. So if your child goes to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, takes that class Monday, Wednesday, Friday, what often happens is that something that's assigned on Monday, it's due on Wednesday. The student either starts it really late on Tuesday night, or sometimes they'll get up early to do it on Wednesday, or they'll do it on the way to school or in the study hall the period before they have the class on Wednesday. The problem with that is that if you are stuck, if you are underprepared and you don't know exactly how to do it, you can't ask for help because there's just no one there to help you. It's too late. So what we work with kids on doing to tackle this is to really figure out what can you do to get started on the day it's assigned. Maybe it's just looking at the directions and doing the first problem. Perhaps it's just figuring out the 3 things you have to do for science and prioritizing your list. But it's just something to do to get started, because then if you need help, it's easy. So anytime we can help our kids to get started early, it's just gold for them. And the other thing I'll mention, kind of just like off topic a little bit, is that when it comes to applying for college, I think this is the time that your executive function skills are actually taxed the most. There's so much to do with the application process. And we often think that our kids can, do these things on their own, that they can create a common app and they can start their essay and they can, figure out when applications are due or which essays they have to write for which schools. But tasks like that feel overwhelming to kids are really, really hard for them. So I would recommend starting the process early. And I know we can talk about this at the end, that UVA has some amazing ways for kids to get started early, to meet with representatives of the school, if you're an alumni, and to help with the process. But in general, I would recommend starting any discussion when it's related to college early as possible. And I actually created free college prep checklists for each grade. So what to do with your 9th grader, what to do with your 10th grader, what to do with your 11th grader. And you can download, or you can get those in your inbox by just texting 55444 and the word college, and they'll come straight to you. And I think these are super helpful with any student in high school, even an 8th grader, just to kind of look ahead at the process, which is often hard for kids that procrastinate. All right, so back to academics. Tip 5 is to ask for help, to figure out, if you don't know how to do something, a way to advocate for yourself. So maybe it's contacting your teacher. It could be, if you have a tutor, asking your tutor. It might be connecting with a friend. But in elementary, middle, and high school, we want our kids to be able to ask for help. This is a really, really important skill that they don't often get practice on. And if they haven't had a good experience reaching out for help, they often won't do it in the future. So we work with kids all the time that have these issues to learn advocacy skills so they can ask for help when they're stuck. And I want to share with you an example of an email a student wrote. I'm going to read it out loud. Dear Mrs. Smith, good morning. I'm writing to you about my essay on democracy. When I log into Schoology, it shows as submitted. However, it has now been more than 2 weeks and there is no grade associated with this assignment. Please let me know if something is missing or if you need me to resubmit my essay. Thank you for your time, and I will see you in class this afternoon. Mary. Now, you might be thinking, my child can never write an email like that. Now, I tell her all the time to go ask for help or send a message to the teacher, and she always says she will and never does. This type of thing is really difficult for kids unless they have some type of template. So I created a template that we use with our students, and I'm giving it to you. You can use it with your child. And it's super helpful because it's basically fill in the blank. Dear teacher's name, good morning. Always include a friendly greeting. I'm writing to you about. Explain what the assignment is or what the issue you're writing about and the steps you have already taken to solve the problem. That's what teachers want to see. Please let me know if how you can help in any way. Thanks for your time, and I will see you in class blank. So basically, they're able to fill in the blanks and get this information and ask for help. And this one you can get by texting 55444 and then the word student email. I think advocacy is an important skill that we don't teach in school, but is vital for all of our kids' K-12 careers and high school too, and college too. All right, tip 6 is to use weekends. Kids often that procrastinate, they don't think about this, but it's really important. And I often share with kids that I work with, when we think about the week, actually Sunday is the most important day. It's not Monday, it's not Tuesday, it's not Thursday, it's definitely not Friday, it's Sunday. Because Sunday is your opportunity on Sunday evening or Sunday morning or afternoon to look at the week ahead. And you can do this with your own kids by piggybacking a Sunday session to perhaps your family dinner, something that's already reoccurring on Sundays. And so this is a time on Sunday night when everybody's together and you say to your kids, what do you have coming up this week? Do you have any big projects, tests? Is there anything that you could think about now and get started on now? Before your week gets away from you. Because often kids that procrastinate, they just show up at school on Monday without really thinking ahead. So we want to know, what do you have, basically, and when will you do it? And then ask them, oh, how might you break that down? We do this with kids all the time. It's called calendaring, where we'll help them to look at their online portal to see what due dates they have coming up. And if they say have a test on Friday, we help them to create little mini due dates of the exact things that they're going to study and populate that into their calendar. And that helps them feel a lot less overwhelmed. Tip 7 is to find an accountability partner. If you have somebody that you can go to do an assignment with, or if it's even to start that lab that is hard for you in biology, and you have an appointment with that person, hey, let's work on this Tuesday at 4 o'clock, then you're accountable to somebody else and you're far less likely to procrastinate. Tip 8 is to prioritize your work. This especially works well with kids that are anxious and that are perfectionists. And I call this the must do, should do, could do list. That means that when kids have a laundry list of things to do for that day, assignments, and they feel really overwhelmed by it, they can categorize them. Must do's, for example, are things that are really important to the grade and they're due the next day. They just have to get done. Should do's are, yeah, these things are important, but they're not due the next day. So you might be able to push them off until later in the week. And then could do's are things that actually could come off of your list. For example, if you've already studied an hour for your chemistry quiz, do you really need to study another hour? Maybe not. But that's a trap that perfectionists get stuck in. Sometimes they will overstudy or they'll focus on things that are not that important. Perhaps that could come off your list. And now that evening, you only have the must-dos, which feels a whole lot better than all those assignments that you had before you categorize them. So let's switch gears just for a moment and talk about digital distractions, because these are all too common in our kids. Often kids are distracted by their phones, by going down the rabbit hole of doing something online that they really shouldn't be doing when they should be using their computer to work on schoolwork. So what does the research say about digital distractions in student learning? Actually, there have been a lot of studies that show that, when kids have their phone, and adults too, with them by themselves when they're doing their work, it's just inherently distracting. However, if they're able to put it maybe in their backpack on the other side of the room, in another room for a short period of time, say 15 minutes, and set a timer, and when the timer goes off, go check their messages and then come back to studying, that's ideal. And that is called a tech break. And a tech break works really well for kids. When we work with kids on these things, we say, you know what, your job, depending on what grade they are, say they're a 7th grader, your job for middle school is to figure out how you learn best. If they're in high school, we'll say your job for high school is to figure out the kind of learner you are so that you're prepared for college. So that means, how do you study best with distractions around you? Where do you study best? What time of the day do you study best? When it comes to note taking, are you better with drawing little pictures that help you remember? Or is the Cornell note system a better option for you? So trial and error and working with these things is really helpful. And that's where the tech break comes in. So you might say to your child, I heard about this. It might work for you. It might not. So then it takes the pressure off of them a little bit to try it. It's not like you're saying you have to do this. That never goes over well with kids. These are some website blockers I found to be helpful for students. They all kind of do the same thing. They allow kids to set a timer and either blacklist the sites they don't want to go to, and they know what they are, or whitelist the sites they want to go to, the ones that have to go deal with school, for a particular period of time, say 25 minutes. And even if they try to restart their computer or remove the app, they can't get to those sites. So this is a way for them to figure out, how can I put away those distractions and focus on what I need to. And this one's called Forest, same type of thing, but for phones. It allows kids to set a timer, and during that time, a tree grows on their home screen. But if they go to Snapchat, Instagram, or TikTok, for example, the tree will wither and die. No kid wants a dead tree. They want the tree to grow to fruition and be planted in their forest. And they can see all these trees being planted in their forest. They can see other kids' profiles. And this is super, super popular for kids, again, that want to limit their distractions. So all these things are helpful. But the other thing that's helpful is to practice forgiveness. And in fact, a study published in the British Psychological Society journal found that procrastinators who forgave themselves performed better in the future, and they procrastinated less. So when kids, specifically high school and college students, when they beat themselves up over it and they told themselves, oh my gosh, you're such an idiot. Why didn't you start this earlier? Look at this grade I got, not what I wanted. I'm such a jerk. That type of self-talk did not help students do better later on. In fact, it resulted in the same or worse behavior. However, when kids said to themselves, and they were trained to say, you know what, that's in the past. I'm done with that. I forgive myself. Next time, I'm going to do things differently. It's okay. They actually procrastinated less in the future. So ultimately, by asking the right questions of our kids, by helping them to be a detective, to practicing forgiveness, all of these things really help us preserve relationships with our students. And that's where it really lands. Our kids won't remember what they got in the 4th quarter of social studies when they're in 4th grade, or their grade in Spanish, the 2nd semester in 9th grade. They won't remember those things, but they will remember the relationship they had with us as their parents, and whether it was a contentious one or a supportive one. So sometimes if you do find that your overtures have fallen on deaf ears, and there's lots of friction and conflict around this issue of study habits and procrastination. It could be that somebody else is a better conveyor of the information. In my practice, we use a framework for executive functions called the 4Ds. And you can use it in your home too, if your child is willing to let you help. And so the first thing we do is figure out what's due, what's coming up, what are the assignments, the tests, the projects. And typically these are things that are not due the next day, but where perfectionists or procrastinators typically fall down. Things that are due at the end of the week or next week or in 2 weeks, or a big project a month from now. So we'll figure out when those things are due. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll help kids calendar the tasks to break it down into smaller increments and make sure that goes on their calendar. And then we'll put those tasks in windows of time when kids feel they have the most energy to complete them. And then the next week or the next session, we'll check in what worked, what didn't. And we're always jockeying and figuring out, what is working well and what isn't, and modifying their approach so that students also learn about what works for them. The next, once we figure out what's coming up, is to write it down. And it could be, writing it down in an assignment notebook, although I will say kids really do not like to do that anymore. Typically it's into a calendar, Google Calendar, or it could be if they use Schoology or Canvas and the assignments populate in the calendar, we'll use that. Decide what could sidetrack. And this is probably the most important question. It's fine when we're working on these things with kids in a session. However, the true test of whether they can conquer these habits is, can they do this on their own? And so we'll have conversations about what could sidetrack you, what could get in your way, and troubleshoot procrastination, distractions, or other issues. And then lastly, we'll help them to get started on the assignments that they deem to be most difficult, because the difficult ones are where kids procrastinate. They don't procrastinate on stuff they like to do. It's also always what they don't like to do. So we'll give them strategies of getting over the hurdle of starting on those hard assignments. So this is generally the framework for helping kids to tackle procrastination. All right, so I'd love to go to Q&A in just a moment. And I wanted to leave you with my contact information. Should you need help, feel free to reach out to me. And if you want to talk, if you hold up your phone and scan this QR code, it will go straight to a calendar and you can talk to me or to talk to one of our program managers in the office. All right, so Robin, I'm going to turn it back over to you in just a second so that we can go to Q&A. So parents, if you have questions right now, this is the time to pop them into the chat and I will answer your questions. All right, so Jessica said, can we get a copy of your presentation for our reference? And the answer is yes. I will make sure you get a recording of this. And Robin is actually recording it and she will send it out to everybody to make sure that they have it. Thank you for asking. Julie said with her child, and this was something she mentioned before, and I want to talk about this. Prior to COVID, my child was a functional procrastinator, and now my child's a dysfunctional procrastinator. And Julie, you're not alone. I've seen that too. I've seen that, like, so many things changed because of COVID. And one of the things that I've seen change is that prior to COVID, kids often had a dedicated study area. Even if it was in their room, they would generally go to their desk and sit and do their work. And actually sitting with your back against a chair and your feet on the ground is conducive to attention, believe it or not. It helps you feel grounded and focused. But when you're doing, and during pandemic, kids were doing homework in their beds. They were cuddled up, they were under a warm blanket, they had their laptop and their books on their lap, and it was just so relaxing. It was naturally distracting. And so I also saw the same thing, Julie, that kids that didn't have these problems to such a degree, they just developed these bad habits during the pandemic. All right. Question from Jessica. What are some strategies to help when procrastination collides with teenage rebellion against schoolwork, parental expectations, etc.? So, Jessica, it's really common. Kids that struggle with these issues often don't want to hear suggestions from their parents. So the best thing we can do as parents is, number one, if you see that there's a really big conflict and it's affecting your child's grades and their academic performance, and you're worried, I would definitely get outside help. I had a parent write to me yesterday and said, I really didn't think this would work because my child did not want to get a coach. But it's actually gone beautifully because she loves, I think her coach is Tammy, and she loves working with Tammy, and it's been a great relationship. So oftentimes if the child and the other adult, the tutor, the executive function coach can develop a relationship, once they get over that hump of getting started, it's super helpful. But from a parent's perspective, I might step back a little bit, and I probably wouldn't apply a lot of pressure if that's not working. So I might take a different approach and ask powerful questions like, what's your week look like? What do you have coming up this week? Do you have any projects? Anything that I can support you with? And even if your child says nothing to you, it's okay. But when we ask, what do you have coming up this week? What's your priority for the day? It actually gets kids' executive function skills fired up and helps them to think ahead. Even if they avoid us and don't talk to us, that question still puts a little thought in their mind to think ahead. And if they do come to us with, anger or frustration, I have the worst teacher in biology, I can't believe I got her. It's a natural reaction for parents to say, hey, cut that out. You're not putting forth the work. You're not turning your work. That's why you have a bad grade. But instead, if all we do is get kids to trust us and say, oh, you know what, I understand. I can see why that would be frustrating. You're right. That's a tough subject. And just empathize and nod, and that's it. And call it a day. That's the best approach to kids that are really resistant. Julie asked, are there any tips to transitioning to college where there is less oversight and structure in a day? And Julie, that's a good question. The number one reason kids don't make it in college is for financial reasons. Behind that is that they have a hard time keeping up with their classes and managing time, because it's just inherently unstructured, and high school is very structured. So I would start by setting up that Sunday session with them and teaching them to look ahead. That's what college is all about. It's all about looking ahead. It's all about thinking, what do I have coming up, and planning for it, because things are not always due the next day. There's also much longer term, like midterms, finals, that you have to plan ahead for. Also, just on a personal level, have them start making their doctor's appointments, doing their own laundry, doing little things around the house, so that they have practice doing those things, so that when they go off to college, if they've had a hard time, it's okay. They've practiced, they've picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and they know how to do it. And I think that's a good approach for getting kids off to college. Marila, I think that's how you pronounce your name, asked, how do we know if our kid is just procrastinating or if they have ADHD? Is there an easy way to tell the difference? Well, procrastination is a characteristic of ADHD, but it's also a characteristic of poor executive functioning skills. And that's, not necessarily it doesn't necessarily mean ADHD. So I'll just kind of back up and explain that every person who's diagnosed with ADHD, which means attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's actually 3 types. There's inattentive, there's hyperactive, and there's combined type. Every person diagnosed with ADHD has weak executive function skills, but not everybody with weak executive function skills meets the diagnostic criteria of ADHD. So is there an easy way? The answer is no, there isn't an easy way. However, if you see that it's more than procrastination, if it's, when your child was young until now, if they've had difficulty with doing things that are hard for them, anybody can pay attention to anything that they like doing. Like any kid that likes video games can play Xbox for 3 hours and never have an attention issue. It's, are you able to focus and finish on things that you have that are difficult for you? That's more of a symptom of ADHD. So if you see multiple things, then that's when you might reach out to your pediatrician and ask about it. You can also get testing. There's lots of people in the community that do testing. We don't do that, but if you need a referral, I'm happy to provide that to you. So Robin, I think those are all the questions we have. Anything else I can answer?
Yeah. And while we're waiting to see if anybody has any other questions, I did want to briefly touch on that UVA resource that you talked about earlier.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, so it used to be called the Admissions Liaison Program, and they just recently rebranded, and it's now called College Compass. This is a resource that's open to UVA alumni families with students while they're in the college application or transfer process. And basically, it's a service. They have college advisors, curated resources, help families connect during a very fraught time. It doesn't have any bearing on UVA admissions, but it's just to help UVA connected families with helping their kids through this time. So I will drop a link in the chat to the webpage for that, so you can kind of take a look. But it's definitely, we've had prior board members use it before. We've heard from people that have had their children use their resources and have really wonderful things to say. So if you're in that process or thinking about it, definitely check it out. And it looks like John just dropped a question in.
See that. So John, if your child has ADHD, are the strategies to prevent procrastination different? And the answer is no. Whether your child has ADHD or just exhibits these symptoms of procrastination, you would generally treat it all the same. The only difference is sometimes if your child's diagnosed with ADHD and you choose to medicate the student, it can help with focus. So it can help kids just have that internal oomph to get started on something and to see it to fruition. So medication in turn can help with procrastination, but there isn't really a cure for it overall.
All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions, and also feel free to unmute if you prefer to ask that way. But I think we will wrap this up. I'm going to drop Ann's email in the chat one more time. And we mentioned a couple times that we did record this whole session, and we will be emailing it out to everybody. So you'll be able to see the slides and hear it all again if you would like to review it. So thank you so much to Ann. She's wonderful, and we will be certainly doing more programs with her in the future. So keep an eye out for that on the DC Who's website. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us tonight.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.